This is Artistic Intelligence, where we explore the intersection of art, sustainability, and technology. This show is brought to you in partnership with the United Nations ITU AI for Good, Changing the Story podcast, and State. Now let's join your co-hosts, Neil Sahota and Michael Ashley.
Hi, welcome to another episode of Artistic Intelligence. Got a fantastic guest today, Sofia Crespo. She is an artist working on envisioning artificial life and generative life forms. One of her main focal points is the way organic life uses artificial mechanisms to simulate itself and evolve. This implies the idea that technologies are a biased product of the organic life that created them and not completely separated object. On the side, Sofia is also hugely concerned with the dynamic change in the role of artists working with machine learning techniques. Sofia, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
It's great to have you on today, Sofia. So, Sofia, for people that don't know, can you tell us a little bit about the story about you as an artist and how you came to create this art?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm a generative artist and I work with machine learning techniques and neural networks. And these techniques, I had been making art already since more than 5 years or so, but it wasn't until 3 years ago that I found out about machine learning. And it all started with style transfer, actually. That was the first one thing that I found out about. And I went, I got really hooked on playing with it and trying to figure out how I could create something that looks alive and how I could communicate textures of natureness. And that's basically how it all started.
What inspired you? I mean, we think of art, and your art is amazing, by the way. I was checking it out. I mean, what inspired you to get into this and use technology and like AI to do generative art?
I think what I wanted to, before I did that, I was using a 3D rendering techniques. So I was trying to render out nature. And I realized that the process when you work on 3D renderings, you get to choose how every single part of the image is going to look like. And so when I eventually found out about style transfer and in particular texture synthesis, which is the technique that I'm mainly using to create my work, or one of the techniques, I realized that I could extract just the main visual concept of nature, that I could just extract like a texture that makes us think of nature to us. So basically, that's something that really moved me, because I realized I didn't have to render a 3D image or like to work on a specular material, for example, for hours and hours. I could just create the data set and train a neural network to understand and reinterpret them. So it was a completely different workflow that really changed how I see images and how I see textures and meaning.
Wow.
So for people that don't know what generative art is and what you're doing, could you give people, the layperson, an idea of what this is about? Because this is a relatively new way to create art. And so for the people that don't know, can you walk us through that?
Yeah. So I think the main concept behind generative art is that it's generated using a programmatic interface, or you get to program something about how the image is going to look. So it's more of a logic aspect to it. I think at least that's how I think of generative art, that one can generate like a batch of variations of a single artwork. It doesn't have to be necessarily like it's different to drawing a picture, or even drawing like a picture digitally, because in generative art we get to to say like, okay, make a loop where for each variation there's a circle that's moving around. For example, that's an example of like programmatic art. And I think that's the idea that one can just generate the art. I don't know if I'm explaining it correctly or simple enough, but at least that's how I understand it.
Sure.
Well, you're kind of talking about maybe organisms and evolution and the way things may evolve, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I actually thought it was fascinating because I know when we chatted before, you mentioned like you never studied biology, but a lot of your art is actually centered around biology. I mean, what were the dots that got connected here?
Yeah, I think I'm fascinated by how sciences, and in particular biology, looks at nature and tries to make tries to understand it. So I've always been fascinated by like biological archives. You know, when you look at a single creature and how there's, for example, like a tree of different creatures and one evolved from another one, and how the namings, like the scientific namings that each of them has. And so I've always been interested in how science sees like the natural world from that perspective. Also because I think there's something that changes the way we see the world, or it reflects a way in which humans see the world. So I think that's I think that's something that for me, like when it came to expressing myself artistically, I wanted to imagine like a speculative biology, or ultimately that's what I want to do, and that I'm working towards. Yeah.
That's really interesting, that term speculative biology, and what you're talking about is really shaping our understanding of biology. And I wonder, from your experience doing this, what has it taught you, and what is the future of art in your mind?
I think that, well, thanks to all the new developments in technology, we're each time going to make art that looks maybe more uncanny in a way, like to the real world. So it's going to be harder and harder to distinguish what's a real art piece, or what is like something generated and something real. I think that's one of the things. There's also going to be like different marketplaces to sell art, and I think like the art world is going to change a lot with time. So there's also new technologies that are kind of changing the way we make a living as artists, whereas back in the days, like, you know, you had to paint or draw, you know, if you were an illustrator, and you had to have maybe a patron who would pay, or, you know, for your art. And as artists now, we're having like different ways of selling our art, like just selling digital pieces. That's something completely new to me, that I'm like, oh, whoa, okay. So I think technology is really changing the way we work and make art, like create art.
Yeah.
I mean, what exactly do you think technology is giving you that you couldn't do otherwise? I mean, what's kind of the secret sauce, so to speak, here that's allowing you to create new forms of art?
Okay, so that's I could talk about this for for such a long time. I mean, so recently what I was thinking about, I was writing down something, and I began thinking about why are we really understanding our own, like the functioning of our own visual cortex, for example, or how we see the world, how is that being affected by computer vision? And ultimately, what I thought is that, you know how we learn from having to teach to somebody? Like if you had to explain to your niece like the meaning of whatever, you know, then suddenly that helps you redefine how you like how you are thinking about it. And I think in a way there's something that that's very similar when we have to teach a machine how to do a certain action. Then suddenly we have to think like, okay, where do we start? You know, if I want to see like where a table ends and, you know, something else begins in a picture, I had to start by seeing the edges. And then suddenly, you know, there was a like neuroscientific study where they were already looking at that, at how we see edges and how we differentiate structures. So that has to happen somewhere in the visual cortex too, like all those very low level functions that are happening there. And so somehow I think that like by having to teach a computer to do things, we are faced with having to define how we see, like, you know, what are those things we are teaching in.
I think as a teacher myself, I know exactly what you're talking about, and you do get a better understanding of something if you have to explain it to somebody else, because you really need to be familiar with it to explain it to somebody.
Exactly.
Yeah, but that makes me wonder. So with your art now, if you're the first wave of artists that are working in this way, and you're teaching the computer to do this, would that mean that the next person could then just kind of go off of what you've done, but they don't have to learn it as well? Or would you say that every person that's encountering this art is having to teach the computer? Is there no shortcutting?
No, there's definitely shortcutting. I mean, I wouldn't know how to program like a computer from scratch, like an operating system from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm taking what other humans have developed, and I kind of take that for granted, and I use it to do something else. So I'm kind of working on top of the work that other humans put in there. So it's all collaborative, actually.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious because, you know, people always talk about using technology to create new forms of art, but I don't think people talk enough about how art actually influences the development of technology. Like James Cameron wanted to make the movie Avatar. He had the idea, I think, more than 10 years before he made the movie, but he knew they didn't have the right movie camera yet. So it's like, someone will create it and they'll make the movie. No one did it. He's finally like, fine, I'll start a company and make the movie camera. That's how he did it. Do you find that going on as well? Like in your work, are you realizing like, oh, I wish I could do something like this? Could someone build that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that there's like, it's becoming more and more legitimate as a research practice, you know? So like the artist is also a researcher and is inspiring people who are doing like research at company and, you know, like actually being paid for it. So, or who actually have the training to do the tool. And so that's why, like, I love speculative design because of that, because there's so many ideas there. And that's just fascinating. It's kind of like teasing the world of, you know, engineering, like to like think differently about something, to, you know, keep pushing the boundaries. So yeah, definitely.
I want to go back to something you mentioned a moment ago about how the whole way of making money as an artist is changing. You mentioned the idea that people have patrons, and I think that very much continues till today. And you also talk about different marketplaces. So for people that are unfamiliar with what you're speaking of, could you paint, no pun intended, paint a vision for other artists, how they could get in on this and how they can be empowered to get into these different marketplaces? Because I don't think a lot of people are aware of this.
Yeah, so I recently found out that there's a place to sell artworks, like the crypto world, like crypto art world. So one can sell their works as like unique pieces or series, and people are willing to collect it and buy it. They're just a digital work, or it could even be like a scan of a drawing, but the people are gonna buy like a digital version of it. And like I just very recently found out about it, and I got started on it. And I was at first like really skeptical because I didn't know like what it was like. I hadn't seen much of a gender diversity, which is something that I was like, oh, well, I kind of care about having diversity in the world and like in the art world. And so I wasn't sure like if I was feeling too comfortable at the beginning. But then I realized that it is actually really, with everything that happened, like the virus and all of these things, like how we as artists have been affected by it. Because suddenly we cannot teach workshops in real life, or we cannot do exhibitions in real life. Like, I realized like lots and lots of artists were making a living out of this, and I thought it was amazing. That people are able to collect an artwork and then maybe sell it. I also saw collectors selling artworks like that they have bought years ago for a lot more expensive. So that was great to see as well. And yeah, there are quite a few platforms out there. I'm still kind of haven't tried all of them, but
Yeah.
I'm happy to give like a list of the ones I know as a link or something, if that's useful.
Sure. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
Yes.
We can we'll put the show notes. I want to actually touch upon the diversity and inclusion because, it didn't naturally register to me that maybe there's a challenge in the art world on that. And, I know that at least with like the whole concept of virtual art exhibits, it's giving more artists a chance for exposure. But maybe you can touch more about the diversity and inclusion aspect, because I don't think it's something that people actually think about when it comes to art.
Yeah, I think about it a lot because I really care about representation. Maybe my mother is like one of the early feminists, kind of like she's an eco-feminist, and she made a lot of her work about that. So I'm kind of I'm kind of influenced by that, but also the fact that I myself have been an immigrant for several years in this country. So I really care about these things, and I think they're really important because we need diversity to function as humans. And actually, there's lots of scientific research of how diversity improves a team.
Yeah.
And how having humans who come from with different views of the world and different experiences actually makes a team grow richer. So and I noticed that in the more like old part of the art world, where like there's more people who are seriously established, I saw that the majority of the top selling artists there are men, and the majority of the collectors there are also males. So suddenly I realized like, okay, well, how much room is there to be like a successful female artist? And I started thinking about that. And the more I thought about that, the more I realized there wasn't enough diversity in the art world.
I'm a little shocked. I guess it never occurred to me, but it's like any other type of role, job, position. I mean, did you encounter barriers in your career as a female artist?
So I think that maybe I think about it because working with technology and like machine learning is in particularly like a male dominated field. So I think for that reason I'm more sensitive to it, because I censor a lot of what might technical commentaries that I would do on things, just to not be the only woman commenting there, on a forum or something. So I feel more self-conscious about it because of that. And I guess I kind of transfer that to the art world to look at it. But there's definitely more females in the art world than there are on the machine learning world. Hopefully that's changing.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah.
And I'm glad you're bringing this to our attention. I very much hope it's changing as well. I want to change gears just slightly and talk about your art itself, Sophia. If you could talk to us about some of the pieces that you're most excited about, and walk us through how you created them, and so we can understand a little bit about your artistic process.
Mm-hmm. So, do you have any piece in particular, or just the most like the pieces of maybe coral that I've generated?
Wherever you would like to start.
So the series Neural Zoo. So from there, those images of nature have been generated using a convolutional neural network, and that's using a technique which is called texture synthesis, where basically, instead of applying the style of one image to another, you just generate a texture out of a given data set. So there's a neural network that basically gives an opinion on your data set, and it generates a new image based on maybe the average features of that data set you gave it. And I created several, lots and lots of data sets and lots of variations of those. And well, a huge part of the work is a curational process too, because one has to make a nice data set in order to create, to get a nice output. And so the data set is key.
By the way, just so people that don't know, when you say that you're creating a data set, could you walk us through what that means exactly?
Yeah, so a data set would be like a collection of images. So I take, for example, like 10 images of a lion, and I would generate a new lion using this neural network. It learns the key features, for example, those 20 images that I gave it, and it just is able to output a new one. Maybe it's a lion that has only one eye, or, like it didn't learn very well, like some parts of the lion, but that's its interpretation. It does the best it can with that data. So.
Yeah.
I find.
So yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Sophia.
No, I was just going to say that there are as many data sets as there is different media. Like if I were, you could give it a neural network, audio data, or, video, just the frames of a video as the data. So there's, I was just going to say that.
I find your work mesmerizing. It literally is. I'm looking at it, and I guess I'm kind of full of wonder and awe about life, right? I mean, there's so much diversity of life. I mean, with your art, what's the impact you're actually hoping to create for people?
Yeah, so partly I want to start a conversation about how we see nature from the perspective of technology. So also to have a way of representing nature inside everything. It's like what we create with this technology. And to meditate, I think it's also kind of selfishly a meditation on the things that I like about those textures that I see. So what I like about, like being very visual, being a person who's very visual, I see like a texture and I'm like, oh, I really love that texture. I wish I could just extract it and take it out of its context so that I can show that to people and they can see how much I like just this texture. And so basically that's thanks to this technology, I'm able to do that. And to, show it to you and show you like, look, this is something I really like. Mm-hmm. What do you think about it? Yeah. So there's that. Then there's the the aspect where I'm wishing to take my work in a more environmental, like putting more of an environmental initiative into it so that I can actually contribute to ocean conservation, for example. So that's something that I'm still working on right now. So to be able to help the organizations that are caring for the environment right now.
I have a follow-up question with that. So let's imagine we have an artist who's maybe even doing really well, but they're only familiar with, let's say, working with old school materials, paint and paper and brush, but they're really inspired by what you're doing and they want to break into this world. They want to learn, and maybe they don't have any technological background. I mean, what advice would you give this person who's really curious about this and wants to be a part of this new art world?
Mm-hmm. They're lucky because there are every day more and more tools to play with these techniques. And so there's this software now, which is called Runway ML, and it allows people to work trying out a bunch of different code repositories without having to install any crazy dependencies on their machine or thinking too much about where they're running the code they're running, and to kind of tinker, with the different techniques. There's also other open source projects like ML4A, which is machine learning for artists. And they have a GitHub account with a bunch of different techniques and even collab notebooks. So I think I learned a lot from ML4A because they also have guides explaining you how what's happening behind the scenes, what the algorithms are doing, how they were even created. So it explains a lot of things, and I think it's a great resource.
Awesome. I got to ask a two-part question tied to that. First part, does this mean that artists have to be part computer scientists now?
I don't think so. Because thanks to all of these techniques, we're able to still be artists, and we don't even have to understand how the neural network works. Really, we're just able to understand what it's like, how we get that output from that data set. That's and those parameters, and that's it. We can just experiment and play with that.
It's really knowing the tools and how to use the tools.
Yeah.
Okay. Second part of my question, I have no artistic skill. I can't even draw a stick figure. With all this technology tools coming out, do I have a shot of being a semi-decent artist?
I also cannot draw a stick figure.
There's hope for me.
Well, I mean, if there's hope for me, there's definitely hope for you too. Yeah, so I don't know how to draw, and I have other things that I plan on learning before I ever learn how to draw manually. I'm more interested in learning. I have a drawing machine, so I'm more interested in learning how to plot, or what to plot, basically, than drawing by hand.
By the way, I'm in the same boat. I have a little, and he always asks me to draw things. I'm like, just ask your mommy to do it. I'm not good at it. So this is absolutely fascinating, Sofia. Could you give us a vision, let's say it's 5 or 10 years from now, as to what the art world looks like because of these technological innovations? What kinds of art could we be creating? Where does your mind go in terms of imagination? Let's say it's 5 or 10 years from now.
So it's always hard to do speculations, but I think that we're all going to have more and more possibilities of making art, like just in the same way that when the first digital cameras came out, suddenly everybody could be a photographer, or start taking digital photography more seriously, or photography more seriously. And I think that something very similar is going to happen with doing generative art and using machine learning tools for it. I think it's going to become easier and easier the more platforms that come out to allow people to do that. Because, at the beginning, it wasn't easier. I'm not saying for me, but for the very first AI artists that there were, they had to go through a lot of stuff to be able to run their code. And now every time there's the resources that facilitate all that process. And so every time it has to be less and less painful. So I basically think that it will just become easier to create, which is good.
Yeah.
That's good. Definitely gives people more chance to express themselves. I'm going to ask, I don't know if you can give us a little sneak peek. What's your next big project going to be?
Okay, so right now I'm working with another artist, Dark Fractures, and with him we've been working on generating 3D. So that's something I wanted to do for a while. Like I didn't want to just generate 2D images. I wanted to see a creature in 3D and actually create a physical object out of it. So that's what we're working on right now.
Cool.
For a residency project.
Cool. I can't wait.
Yeah, it's a lot of work because we have to 3D print a lot, and I'm not a 3D printing expert, so it's also like a huge learning process. So,
I'm going to be an expert soon.
I don't know. We'll see about that. We'll see, but I'm working on it. So
that's super cool. Well, Sofia, if people want to learn more about the art that you've created and find out more about you and follow you, how can they do so?
Well, I'm on Instagram, Twitter, and I have a website. I can give you my link, but also I'm Sofia Crespo 91. That's my user, and my website is sofiacrespo.com with an F. So yeah. So
cool.
Yeah.
We'll make sure to put all those in the show notes for our audience. And Sofia, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you for sharing your story
Thank you.
and your art with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Hey, if you like today's show, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment.
If you've been enjoying the Changing the Story podcast series, please subscribe and share it with your friends.
Thank you.